I I joined the Territorials about a year, pretty well a year before the war broke out. My brother was in the Territorial Army, and I thought I'd join it, you know, because they was expecting something was going to happen. We thought that we'd all be together, so that's what I did. And I joined that in Henley, the Oxon Buckler Infantry, 4th Battalion, Territorial Army. Then on, I think it was the 3rd of September, war broke out then, didn't it? I think, war broke out, so we all amalgamated, and then we was all training, then to the north of France, which was Grand-Atiche, Petit-Atiche. And we got up there, and we was up there for a 30-year wall. They was just they was putting up tank traps and that. That's what they was doing. I said, but of course I was batman to Lieutenant Troughton. I said, so I was quite busy with building tank traps. And then we was up there, and then we moved then we moved out to up through the Ardennes, and then we got to the second line of defence.
How were you feeling? How were your comrades feeling?
Not very well, I tell you. I know, you was a little bit jittery, but you never worried about it, because simple reason was you had to go for it, and that was it. You was there. So we moved up on the edge of the wood, and we dug in there, I said, and we could hear all their guns going and that, and then they was coming back through our line, the first line. I said, in Sherwood Foresters, and they, I said, was coming back all through. So I said, they went through us. I said, we just still dug in. Then I said, after a while, the order come through to move out of the forest quick, because they was coming round us. Going to pincer movement, you see, to take it in. So the order was to get out. So that's when we started to retreating. And then we retreated right back. And then that's how it kept on all the time. Retreat all the time, because we never had the firepower as what they had, you see, like, and when they went over D-Day, we had nothing like that. No heavy firepower like they got like that. So we had to move back, and we moved back, kept going back and back. But one of the worst places I always remember is Tournai. They give us what the hell they did. They dropped them, they did, yeah. It's terrible, there it was. It was a heavy bombing and that, you know. There was a terrible loss of life there, I know that, yes. So we what was left, I said, we carried on from there. You couldn't do anything about it. And we carried on there, and we moved right down, and then we carried right the way back into France. And we was down, and they started bombing these Stukas. They started bombing us, you see. I said, and then we was sort of stuck up there, and my brother was there because he was on these ammunition lorries, he was. And I come back there, and of course I went in there, and we stopped for a bit. I had a cup of tea, and the driver I was with, we had drink, we stopped there. And then I thought, what? I said to my brother, what, you had it? He said, Dickie said, we're just going to go to the coast. Yeah, he said, we're working away the coast, see if we can get across, you see. So I said, oh, I might be all right then. The next thing, Lieutenant Stoner, he was head of the transport, he said, is there a Property Charlton here? So Jim said, yeah, it's my brother here. He said, he's just coming back. He's been out with the wounded. Oh, he said, well, they got a report back to Cassel, which I had to report back to Cassel. when I got back to Cassel, after the following day, these Tiger tanks had closed the gap. So we were surrounded, you see, for all these Tiger tanks, Jerry. And
Call back to Cassel. You didn't.
no, he made it. Yes, he made it. He got away. My brother did. And all we had to do is head for the ditches on each side of the road because we was setting sort of targets. So we headed into the ditches. And then we had to creep along the ditches, low down, you see.
So how did you feel being captured? Apart from the obvious.
I know. Yeah. Well, the way Sergeant Major Bailey was on the bed, it wasn't very hopeful.
1939, when war broke out, and I was about 19, Bob Ferry and I decided we'd like to join the army together. Glad to have something to do. I was looking forward to going to war, if you want to know the truth. So we cycled to High Wycombe Recruiting Centre, and we were a bit disappointed when we were told we weren't wanted. And they'd send for us when we were ready. So it was much later. Bob went first and joined up, and I was left behind. So I decided to join the LDV, Local Defence Volunteers. That was a help because they were all old soldiers and their job was to... Billy, I've got to stop. I've gone all funny.
Just relax, don't worry about it. Just think.
I've got to stop. Her job was to see that there weren't any fifth columnists cycling about at night or any parachutes dropping. Father took me to King's Cross Station. He said, "Shall I come see you off?" I said, "No, we'll say goodbye here. It's the only time that I've had to carry all my equipment. Plus what I was wearing, I had spare shoes, spare uniform, gas mask, gas cape, water bottle, bayonet, rifle." And I got on the train. There was one or two others that I knew, where a troop ship was waiting for us called the Near Hellas. We went out from Greenock, round North Ireland, into the Atlantic, and we headed straight across towards Newfoundland. And then we turned across and headed across the equator to West Africa, a place called Freetown. The officer came down and said, "There's something going on. I don't think you are going to the Far East." He said, "There's something happening. We may be going to North Africa." And that's why I think we stayed there a little bit longer. And we had to get on a train, the worst journey I've ever been on. Bitterly cold. We were in shorts and shirts and nothing else. And we travelled all night. We huddled together, about 12 of us. I put a towel round my middle to try and keep warm. I should have put it round my head, I think. In the morning when we arrived, just outside Cairo, I was very surprised to see everybody else was in uniforms, thick. We were told we were going now through the gap, the barbed wire, from Egyptian desert into the Libyan desert. The officer had gone through first, and then as the rest of us were going through the gap, the post corporal was on the end side of the gap. He had an infantryman with a Bren gun up on a tripod in case we were attacked by any aircraft. Instead of aircraft, down the wire on the Egyptian side came a German scout car with 2 men in it. So he wants to fire and shoot it. He said, "There's a German scout car coming down." The corporal says, "You can't fire, you've got to get orders from the officer." He said, "How can I? He's half a mile away." And by the time they argued about firing or not, the scout car went through the gap and disappeared into the Libyan desert. He wasn't too happy about that. Anyway, we went on for a while and we stopped in a wadi. He said, right, getting evening now, brew up and we'll have our rations. Corporal Cole and myself will go forward and see what the situation's like. Well, the situation was 2 or maybe 3 tanks had gone through the line and were somewhere out in the desert with us. We were to go there next morning and either help evacuation, or if they'd held the line, we were to drop our load as normal. In the night, we heard a rumble of tanks. We looked a bit suspicious. Whose tanks were they? They went to the nearest lorry, and it happened to be a friend of mine, Danny Fisher. He had a bit of a shock when they stopped by him, and the tank commander had opened up the canvas. He thought, oh my God, I've been caught. He was in a white sheepskin coat, and he said, hey mate, can you tell us where we are? They were lost. They were the tanks, looking for the tanks that had gone through the line. So we told them where they were and which way the front line was, and they rumbled on. So this officer said, I'm going to take a prisoner. He said, I want you to take me, and I had a sergeant and I think about 8 men, perhaps it was 10. And we're going to go to an outpost, Italian outpost, grab a sentry and bring him back for interrogation. So off we went in the dark. And he said to me, can I have your pickaxe handle? Well, you can't refuse an officer. I only hope he's going to bring it back. And they disappeared. All was very quiet. Presently there was a crack of a rifle. Oh dear. Next thing, there was everything being sent. Bang, 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 rat-tat-tat. They didn't know where they were firing. I think they'd woken up the Italians who didn't know which direction we were coming from. Well, out of the darkness came running these 7 or 8 men. And the officer jumped in. Get going, get going. I certainly did. After we travelled a bit, I said, well, what happened, sir? He said, well, we just get there and some idiot fired his rifle. He said, when I find out who, it's a court-martial. We'd have to try again another night, and I'd like you to be my driver. Well, I didn't have to. A lot happened between then and the next thing.
My name is Alfred Jackson. I was born the 23rd of the 1st, 1921. And I got called up in the army when war broke out. So then, never left home before, and this was some sort of an adventure. Got no idea where we would end up. We were all cheesed off. We didn't want to be in the army. We got called up. Got no idea where we were going, and I think it was several weeks before we got to Egypt. We didn't know it was Egypt where we were going. We didn't know where it was till we got off the ship, and all we could see was sand everywhere. And the only place I knew that had sand like that was Egypt. So that was the first time that we knew we were at war, and we'd gone to Egypt. And then we had to get kitted out with KDs, which was shorts, summer wear, shorts and a light shirt, up into the sky and gradually coming towards us. And somebody said, "You're quite right, and we shall have to take cover, otherwise we shall be smothered. And we won't live through that if we do get smothered." So we had to get our blankets out and all sit in a circle with our backs to one another, wrap ourselves up in the blankets over our heads and everywhere else, and wait for it to hit us. And when a sandstorm hits you, the wind is howling because it's being blown towards you. The sand is being lifted up in the air, and that could be 50, 60 feet high or more. And this twice we've encountered this. And I could say at one time, one of them could have been 100 feet high. Just a solid wall of sand coming towards you. And the wind was behind it, blowing it towards you. And if you weren't covered over, even if you were covered over, you could still suffocate. And if you didn't cover yourself over, you were dead anyway, because it would just wipe you out. It would bury you. It buried our vehicles and everything else. So when it was all blown over and past, it could last for an hour or even 2 hours before it finally blew away and past you and the sand had gone down the road. And then you had a job to dig your vehicles out and everything else, you were covered in it. So a sandstorm is not a very nice thing. It can kill you or bury you, whatever you like. So I think there was 2 sandstorms we were in during the time I was out there anyway. When I said before that they thought we had I was at the Battle of Alamein, I was 21. That was my birthday. I'd saved a large bottle of beer I managed to get hold of, and I said there was 2 other lads with me, and I said, well, I'll bury that in the sand and we'll have that tonight. Well, when I managed to dig it up, I took the cork out and it all disappeared. It was boiling. So we didn't have a drink or even a cup of tea for my birthday. And I was 21 at the Battle of Alamein. And Montgomery was just over the other side of us. We could only go very slowly, and just as we got to the brow of this hill, we got no idea where we were. Suddenly, thousands of Germans and Italians came rushing towards us over the hill and surrounded us. Of course, we stopped. We didn't know whether they were armed or not, but after a few seconds we could see they were unarmed. And they were prisoners. This was the German and Italian army had given themselves up. Rommel had gone back. There's all these Germans and everything. And the Germans were shouting at us, Trinkenwasser, Trinkenwasser. We didn't know what they meant because we didn't speak German. Anyway, this driver said, I think they're asking for water. He said, well, we've got a lorry load of water here. I said, well, we can't give it to them. We've got it for our troops. He said, yeah, but we've got all these leakers. And by the time we get where we're going, they'll be empty anyway. He said, but we don't know to give them the full ones. Climb in the back if you can. He said, sort these leakers out and give it to them. And this is what I did. So I found about 6, 7 or 8 of them and passed them out to them, and they couldn't thank us enough. Thank us, you never say. And they all disappeared off in the distance. But he kept going slowly, and then suddenly we could hear this roaring with the shell coming over. And just as I've spoken to him about this, keeping the speed down, it suddenly went quiet, and it went deathly quiet. The noise of the shell roaring stopped, and I said to Bill, Tinat, this is ours, because someone had told me that whilst you could hear the shells roaring, you were safe, near enough. But if it stopped, it was coming directly at you. And this one stopped, and it landed right in front of the vehicle, almost hit the bonnet. Everything came all over the cab. Stones and God knows what. We thought we'd been blown up, but the truck was still going, and Bill was still driving. We went down the hole and up the other side. If we'd have been going 1 second faster, that would have been a direct hit on the cab. So I wouldn't be here, nor would he. We'd have been.
And when the war started in 1939, I'd already started work. I started work in January 1939, and in 1941, I decided that I should be doing something in the war effort and joined the Auxiliary Fire Service. At the end of December 1941, I received my call-up papers to report to Cayley Barracks in Oxford to join the Oxford and Bucks Light Infantry. Before I went up to Cayley Barracks, I thought, well, knowing full well you should have a very short hair going into the army, and I went to a barber shop in the town of Banbury and told me I was on my way to Oxford to be called up. Would he give me a very short back and sides, which of course I had. Well, when I arrived in Oxford, where all the new recruits were on a parade, there was about 30 of us, and the officer examining us walked along the front row first of all and had a few words to say. Then he walked behind us, and fellows had to keep on leaving. They were all going to have their haircuts. And I thought, well, I should be all right because I've had one a haircut this morning. But lo and behold, when the officer got to me, he punched me in the back and he said, "Did you feel that?" I says, "Yes." He said, "Well, go and get your haircut. I'm standing on it." So I had 2 haircuts in one day. I think that's quite a record. Well, it was quite a shock to the system going from civil life into the army. But really, in those days, we didn't ever travel very far from home, and I hadn't lived with a number of men before, which was very strange. We were billeted in huts. I would think probably around about 40 of us in a hut. We had a bugler. As you probably know, the light infantry, we had to answer to bugle calls. And we were told that we got to memorise these bugle calls. There was about 10 in all. And we had this bugler, and we were told that we could ask him to keep on playing different calls until we really knew what they were all about. Well, I think the only bugle call that we all knew and all welcomed was "Come to the cookhouse door, boys." Our training consisted mainly of a rifle practice on the rifle range, of throwing grenades behind we had a brick wall. We had to throw the grenades over the wall. We did a little bit of Bren gun practice. We did quite a lot of parade drill on the parade ground. Very often that was to the accompaniment of the regimental band. I would think about every 10 days we would have a route march consisting of about 20 miles, very often in full battle order, which was quite a load to carry, in addition to a rifle or even a Bren gun. And the route march would take us always through the city of Oxford, and we were led through the city with the regimental band. We would go for about a 20-mile route march. When we got back to the edge of the city, the regimental band would be there again to meet us, and we would have to march back through the city behind the regimental band. And of course, that encouraged us to a march probably much smarter and quicker. Talking about the speed, the infantry, we used to have to march at 140 paces to the minute, which was pretty well running. Well, we used to go up on what they called Shotover Hill, which was a hill on the edge of Oxford, and there we used to have to dig slit trenches. A slit trench is a trench about 4 foot by 2 foot, and we would go down probably 3.5, 4 feet, and we felt that was a waste of time. But once we got into action in Normandy and other places, we soon learnt to dig and dig quick. In fact, we used to talk about the infantry having the 3 Ds. It was digging, dashing, and dodging. All 3 Ds were very important to us, and a spay was a very important part of the equipment. Of course, I think it was the second day when we were at the barracks. We went to the quartermaster sergeant's depot and fitted out with uniform. He just looked at us and handed a pair of trousers and a tunic, and he said that will fit you. And we had a khaki shirt and thick woolen socks and heavy boots. He did ask us the size for the boots, and when we got back into the barrack room, I think the first hour or two was spent changing the uniforms amongst ourselves, finding which fitted the best. But and another thing which we didn't like about the uniform, it was virtually khaki with shades of white, and it was treated with some kind of gas proofing. Khaki was very rough and coarse. The khaki shirts were a bit rough on the skin, and everything that we had, it wasn't. It seemed old-fashioned, and we found that we could only cover about half a mile at the most before we had to rip off all the sealing of the electrics and the exhaust system. I met Major Howard, I think it would be February or March 1942, and he came to the K2 barracks and he was getting his group together in readiness for the taking of Pegasus Bridge. He didn't tell us that at the time, but he told us that he was got to get men together for a special mission, and they would be over to France in gliders. Well, I think at the time I thanked him for the opportunity, but I would much rather keep my feet on the ground, and so I stayed in the infantry and didn't join the gliders. Well, during that time, D-Day happened. The 1st Battalion, which I was posted to, went into action in Normandy on June the 24th and the 25th. And I was posted to the 1st Battalion, which was already in action in Normandy. I went up to the recruiting office, unknown to my parents, and volunteered my services. And the next thing was that I had a letter from Southampton telling me to report up there for a medical. My parents were horrified, naturally, but the deed was done, and I passed all the necessary things that I had to, and then the next thing was a letter telling me to report to Bovington in Dorset, Bovington Camp in Dorset, on the 18th of March 1943. From once I got to Bovington, that's when life started in earnest. I didn't realise what I'd let myself in for, but there we are. I took it as it came. We were all in the same boat, and I joined 30 Primary Training Wing at Bovington Camp, and spent 6 weeks there doing drill, camouflaging, observation work, mainly infantry stuff. And then when we passed out after 6 weeks, we marched down to the bottom of Bovington Camp to the 58th Training Regiment, which was Royal Armoured Corps. And from there on, we started training in earnest. We start off with, we had 2 more weeks of drill, and then we started on the tank crew courses. We lost a lot of tanks. The Americans lost a huge quantity of their swimming tanks because they tried to offload in very, very rough water, and as soon as they came off, they just sunk. The tank only had a swimming tank only had about 2 foot of freeboard, so the waves would splash over the top, and you couldn't afford to take on too much water, otherwise you put the whole thing out of balance. But it was a very primitive idea, but it was a wonderful one, and a swimming tank when it was in the water looked just like a small boat, except for the fact that you couldn't see a gun or anything. It was just an object in the water, which was just, as I say, just like a boat. It was horrific. I've never been so frightened in my life. The tanks are loaded on backwards onto tank landing craft, and then you set off to sea, to wherever you're going, and when the time comes to offload, the front hatch is dropped, which slopes down at about 45 degrees, and the tank is then moved forward to, because on that ramp or hatch there is an attachment which fits the tracks of the tank, so that when the tank drives off to enter the water, it engages in this attachment, and you very, very slowly go down this 45 degrees till you hit the water. And while you're going down, you're wondering how long it's going to be before the tank comes up. Finally, you breathe a sigh of relief when the front end of the tank suddenly pops up and you're free then. You then engage the propellers and head for shore.
Feelings on D-Day, weren't they? What were your emotions?
Just frightened.
You were 19, weren't you?
Yeah, I was 19 years old. It was a new situation altogether. You were completely unprepared for.
I take it you knew there was gunfire, bombing and all of that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you fully expected that.
Yeah.
But
So what was your outlook? What did you see when you landed?
well, you just took cover and looked after yourself. It was a case of every man for himself.